Well, here we have another couple of guests all the way from Ardnamurchan this time. We've got Alex and Scott. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good to see you both.
Yeah. So, the book. So, what was your first impression when you opened this book?
It's just, there's so many challenges in it to try to sort of marry up what was being done back in the day and match that with what we've got going on at ours. And there were some parts of the project which I thought were quite easy and matched quite well with our distillery. So we don't really have anybody sitting behind the screen running our distillery. Everything's done manually, which is very much sort of in time with what was going on back then. But then we've got modern technology like the semi-liter turn, and we just had to switch all that off and manage it as best we could and try and think of all the challenges that were going to come. Yeah, very interesting.
I mean, what fascinated me, not so much on the technical side, because that's more Scott's department, but more on the overview of the era, and you certainly picked up on this in the forward, was what was the UK like at the time. We'd come out of a pretty bad situation. We'd lost a huge amount of working population, and it was almost like today, post-Brexit, post other challenges, we're in a similar situation where we're having to automate because we don't have enough people. So whether you run a hotel or whatever else, especially if you're in a remote part of Scotland, you're looking to ways to manage the business without the volume of people to work it. So there's that, but also the whole aspect, and I know this has been touched on in previous chats, but the whole aspect of passing the knowledge down. So people to people, generations to generations. Scott previously mentioned, that he'd been in the trade 20 years, but what's it like to speak to someone who's been in 50 years and beyond? And then from, what you picked up before that. So that, I've always felt that's so important. And I've been very lucky growing up with a father who's lived to a great age and his mother, my grandmother, who also lived to a great age. So actually I can trace back just two generations, back to the 1800s. So I get to learn all these incredible stories from the person who was there. And it's, flipping that all on its head, but taking it into a modern dynamic is why we decided, and Scott has driven this latterly, but why we decided to use blockchain at Ardnamurchan to record everything that we're doing. It's a modern version of locking all those stories, all those secrets, all those distillation techniques, all those trials and errors into something that cannot then be changed, and you can just access it whenever you want it.
That's a good point, Alec. I often say my experience is the sum of all my mistakes. And you're speaking about the blockchain. Yes, very important, because folk move on. You forget. You said it seems a long time ago since you started this project. It's great how to lock that in is so important for traceability, but understand, because something might take off and you're saying, how did we do that again? I've seen that lost in processes.
Yeah, we've got all the data points logged in for the whole of the year, and that includes this project and any other projects that we've done. And when I pull a report off for the year, and I see a big dip in the yield, I know exactly where that came from.
That was that James Eadie experiment.
Put a little asterisk beside it.
Yeah. But I think it also shows what has been lost. A lot of this information is just like out there. It wasn't part of people's consciousness in terms of how whiskey was made. That was one of the great revelations for me.
Yeah, Leon's work is incredible, and I mean, how many people have that patience to go and extract information of that caliber from different sources in an era when it wasn't particularly well, documented anyway.
So in terms of the whiskey, what was how did you get? What was the thought process? Because you've got what strikes me as an infinite number of possibilities.
Yeah.
So what did you hone in on, and why did you hone in on?
Just took every sort of step, bit by bit, took what I could out of the excerpts from the passages, decided which would work best for us, which would be easiest So taking the easiest route with some things and then thinking, well, that's quite far removed from what we do, what's going to happen there? And then having to account for things like, right, we're not going to put the rakes on in the semi-litre ton. We're going to have to add more liquid to account for that. Or we're not going to recircuit as much. What's that going to do to the bed? Are we going to get the flow off of that? Yeah, just trying to find the problems before they happened.
We were quite lucky though, because Leon was very much a trigger in this whole sort of thought process. But we'd actually decided to run a week. So the production for this was a day, so two mashes, wasn't it? Yeah. But we decided to run a week for another project with a very similar, heritage malt based and all the rest of it. So it was almost like we had a kind of practice before we had to get to this stage. It wasn't exactly the same, but it allowed us to see what things like, well, in our case, Chevalier would do, and how we had to adapt to all of that.
Yeah, we didn't change much of the processes in the previous heritage run. So the processes were changed, but we knew how the malt was going to behave. We knew when we get our predicted spirit yield, don't panic. We knew roughly how the brewer's yeast was going to interact as well, although in the previous one we didn't use 100% brewer's yeast. So it's like Alex was saying, we had an idea of where we were heading before that day, but you still just don't quite know exactly what's going to happen on that day, and if there's going to be any problems that you've not foreseen. But. And
actually, again, I think it was Francis that touched on it, or one of the previous chats, was, this forced us, for all the right reasons, it forced us into changing a huge amount. So not just the barley, but the techniques, everything, all into one. What we did prior to this in the week leading up to it was part of that change. So therefore we've already seen what some things do to make other things, rather than having to do it all at once.
Yes.
The biggest change we saw with this was not using any distillers yeast at all. So it was just brewers. And the fighting of the yeast at 69 hours was still going on. And the colour of the wort, and amazing.
I described it looked like Fanta because it was so orange, but it was still fizzing. It was still going. And I don't think we've had such a violent fermentation out of the wooden washbacks before. When the guys came in the morning, I could show you the video, but there's a lot of expletives in it. It was trying to burst out the door.
The washback rocking.
Yeah. So that had never really quite happened to that extent before.
Yeah, we got 5,000 litre headspace on these old wooden washbacks, and it was absolutely. It wasn't just coming up; it was like wanting to hit the roof.
We tried small boys. That reason.
We tried to stay as true as we could to it. I mean, even to the point where we would time in the lead up to it to make sure we were only going to use the wooden washbacks. We didn't want going into the steel. We didn't preheat the wash, just little things like that, thinking, right, well, they wouldn't have done that, so why are we doing it? So we tried to stay as true as we could to the excerpts that we had, which was quite fun, and the guys really enjoyed it.
Good.
It was taken on completely positively.
And Stewart, you changed the cut points for this production?
Yeah, we kept the 4 shots the same, exactly the same as we always do, but we brought the cut points down for what we usually do. The effect on the spirit, we had a little bit of a blind taste test between our normal spirit and what we've done for this, and you wouldn't think it came out the same distillery. It's so different.
So it was quite different.
Yeah. I'll not say which one they preferred.
Different. They're all good.
We have quite an inherent oiliness to our spirit anyway. It was one of the discussions I had back in the day with the late great Dr. Jim Swan, because he did very much help me design the build in the first place, and he then came and waved his magic wand in terms of the recipe and how the technique. But I said, look, Jim, what we really want out here on the West is we want something that's probably impossible. We want a fast maturing, heavy spirit that's clean. And so anyway, we'd had that chat at the design stage, and he said, well, you could do things like maybe undersize your shell and tube condensers, shove them outside the building, little tweaks here and there. And we certainly got a bit of weight to the spirit, but it's clean and it is amazingly maturing. 5 years, it's already coming to life well. So to be able to use that, the mechanics that were in place, already producing an oily spirit to a certain degree, and then go to the extreme, I mean, it's another dimension in terms of weight. It'll be really interesting to see how long it takes to mature. And I know this has been discussed as well, but you know, are we looking at something quick, or are we going to have to be patient?
What's your hunch, guys?
Well, you happened to be there at the distillery when we were putting through the spirit run.
Yeah.
The first spirit run. I think I brought over a sample for you to try.
No, I really like it. I mean, it's like we all knew Chevalier would be bready. This is like coconut cake. I mean, it's like you've got almost the cake mix slightly cooked, and then you just poured coconut oil on top of it. It's got a really rich, bready kind of doughy thing. Personally, I think it will take time. I'm thinking, you know, we're going to have to add a few years to our normal 5 years, but we'll see. I mean, it'll be fascinating.
Because in the way you approached this was slightly different to you know, to some of your colleagues. Sorry, start again. I mean, the way you approached this was different. That you looked at every part and changed. You know, rather than going, actually, I understand my distillation, I'm going to keep the distillation the same. You went root and branch, which was great.
Yeah, I mean, that was your part very much, but from my personal point of view, looking at sort of down on the whole concept, it's something that we want to do more of. So whether it be a week or 2 weeks or a month, whatever, we've got the bare bones of a malting. I feel actually terrible that, you know, we've got other distillers who've been part of this, secret distillers, unnamed distillers, who have had no bare bones of a malting and have made it work.
Yeah,
and yet we didn't even try. But it's certainly given us a kick in that in the future. So we've got control over most of the barley with our farm in Fife. So I'm absolutely determined that we can grow Chevalier in Scotland. It's never been done as far as I know. And the reason I believe it hasn't been done, and I may be wrong here, but the reason I believe is it grows too tall. And if you see what kind of weather we've had this so-called summer, it would be on, you know, but by harvest time it'd be on the ground. So we'll see. Maybe we get a sheltered field, maybe we can add something which shortens the growth, we don't know. But to grow it under our control, if you like, and then take it through our own floor maltings into maybe a 2-week period every year, that would be a dream come true, really. And I don't know if there's any bit of the process that you found to be really fascinating that was different.
Yeah, I mean the fermentations they could have done maybe longer.
Yeah.
So the next heritage run, whenever that is, when we do it again rather than if we do it again, we'll time it with a shutdown. So we'll charge our washbacks, we'll then shut down for the week, and we'll give it that bit longer to keep going. So let's say that it did have some life still left in it. It'd be interesting to see what happens with that sort of secondary lactic fermentation, how that affects the flavour compounds and everything. We just couldn't quite do it this time, but we will. That's something
we nearly had a positive effect from a storm.
Well, yeah, aye. So the two spirit runs were ended up 6 days apart. So the fermentations were done back to back, the wash stills were done back to back, but the actual spirit runs, there were 6 days between them, because we got the first spirit run through and then we got hit with Storm Babet. The power went out in the peninsula and we thought, okay, well that's fine, we can do it tomorrow. Came back out and it knocked the inverter out in the fan for the boiler, so that was 6 days to repair that. So 6 days between the spirit runs, which obviously won't really have much of an effect on it, but that's just the challenges you have with distilling in that part of the world. You just have to accept it. It was just a bit unfortunate that Leon and Rupert came to see the second spirit run coming through and take samples off it, and they got there and I had to explain to them there was no power. But we weren't quite eating over candlelight that night, but we did have a bit of power by the time.
I think by the time we were served.
Yeah.
That's interesting that the fermentation was still fermenting so long in that.
It's just the way that it happened, and there's certain things that you would change if you go back, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I think when we do another heritage runs like that, we'll try and get the fermentations longer.
Was it hard to handle in the wash still? If it was still frisky?
No, no more than usual anyway. It didn't seem to boil up to the sight glass any more than it did usually. I did find that once the wash still was off, and we had 2 runs through of it, the coils were absolutely manky. They were much dirtier than usual.
There was something left to burn
on. Thinking, wow, okay, there's been something pretty heavy in there that's coated the coils.
You were still scraping that off a month later.
Yeah, exactly. Aye.
There'll be a legacy of this one day's production.
So a greater respect for distillers of the past as a result of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we all always had respect for our ancestors in the industry. And again, this has been touched on, but the amount of manual intervention, not just in the washbacks, whatever, but the direct fired stills, the malting process, and the fact that they were dealing with sporadic supply chain, which in fairness, we've had that too in the last couple of years. Despite modern techniques of shipping and stuff, things have been forced on us. But no, absolutely fascinating, and yeah, huge amount of respect.
We like to shout from the rooftops about our distillery being very manual, and having guys running up and down the stairs and every valve being open and closed, but there's manual and then there's what was going on back then, and you have to respect that.
Yeah.
So you will then take some of these learnings and actually move forward with them.
Yeah.
I mean, but just as a one-off, like the heritage trials, or is there something within this that you might even adapt into the normal operation of the still?
I mean, certainly from my point of view, I want to lay down every year. I want to lay down some of this kind of style, old style, whatever you want to call it, of stock, and it may only be a couple of weeks. But I think from my dream, as I said, is to get our own maltings going, so that we can have direct from farm all the way through the process, and we can control right back to the barley being grown. And yeah, if the weather turns out to be typically Scottish, then so be it. It's just it's like our vintage. It's part of the issues of that year.
And it strikes me, the book came out at a really interesting time in terms of how the Scotch whisky industry is evolving at the moment, because there was already this kind of undercurrent of, right, let's begin looking at yeast and heritage barley varieties and everything. Why do you think that this movement has started in the past few years?
I think there's a lot of collaboration between distilleries, which I came from a different industry completely into this, and the thing that just took me back straight away was how everyone within the industry worked together. Okay, we're competitors sort of, but we're also friends. I don't think I've ever went into the distillery and came away not thinking, well, that's interesting. So I don't know whether it's maybe that collaborative sort of nature to the industry. You get people, if you bump into someone that's in the industry, they will talk the hind legs off you. And I'll be the same. So everyone's constantly learning from everyone else, and I guess that will then breed in different ideas and think, oh well, we could do that for a couple of weeks. So.
I agree, and I think actually, again, because I think you asked the question previously, can we make it even more collaborative, this particular project? And I think, why not? Let's all go and work in each other's distilleries. burn them down.
Or steal a useful part from it.
Well, there is that. But no, I think, and again, just boring, harking back to blockchain usage, but the consumer is definitely driving a lot of this, not just the collaboration, this new collaboration, then the adventurous nature of modern distilling, and what our blockchain is enabling us to do, our ledger, if you like, is to feed that information in as much detail as they want to consume. So from geek to basic level, but it's feeding that information through to the consumer, and that is really transparent in the first place. But it's also factually quite interesting for them. So they get more of that, and they want more, experiments.
That's right.
So if we can all collaborate around that, I think we get a much better direct relationship with the consumer to help us do that.
I think what's satisfying from us is 6 distillers signed up to do it, and also innovative distillers, and Well, you guys are now what, nearly 10 years, so
Yeah, well,
you're joining the old club now, aren't you?
It feels like it. No, we were running Spirit by now, 10 years ago. We first cask filled was the 1st of August 2014, so I'm sure we'll be a dram maybe extracted for samples, for analysis.
Quality control on
quality control.
Yes.
But looking back to looking forward, what Scott was saying.
Yep.
Aye. Taking the elements from it, learning.
Right.
Every day's a school day in the distillery. I mean, the day-to-day operations in there can be not monotonous, but they have to be repetitive for quality reasons.
Yes.
So to throw in something that's a bit unusual,
Cannonball.
the guys were more than on board with it. And even when we were making the decisions for what we should do and why we should do it, it was involving them as well and saying, what do you think? And saying, well, I think we should switch that off. Oh God, okay. Well, we're going to have to account for that some other way. You were saying about the blockchain and the recording of it. But we can actually record who done which part. So we know who done the mash, who done the distillation. And it was like a fight to see who was going to be doing it, because there was only 2 mashes, 2 distillations, and we've got 4 guys in production. And due to the power cut, one of the guys got to distill his own mash, which, each to their own, but he was very excited about that.
Yeah, there's no hiding now.
No, that's it, yeah.
All over the blockchain.
But that in itself is really exciting, that it could have ended up being a bit of a chore, because it was difficult, and washbacks erupting,
Well, even before we started,
but everybody was engaged and excited about it.
But given the nature of our location, there are certain truck drivers who won't even attempt that road. We're very lucky that we have one that does all the cask haulage and everything. But when we ordered the Chevalier malt from down south, because it isn't grown in Scotland, it arrived at our Fife warehouse first to be transshipped into another truck, so the one that could drive that road. And whoever brought it had obviously been taking the corners quite quickly. And one of these incredibly valuable 1-ton bags, as soon as he unzipped the curtain on the side of the truck, this just went poof onto the concrete. So there might have been a few stones in this. We're kind of shoveling it back in. But it was, it was touch and go where we had enough, let alone. But anyway.
Aye, I think we were down at the mill room picking out stones every 10 minutes. It was backed up again. Wonder why. Oh yeah.
Some good Fife gravel.
Whose idea was that?
But that's an interesting point about the Chevalier not being grown in Scotland. So.
I mean, I stand to be corrected, but I'm led to believe it's never been grown, certainly in modern times.
I think it might have been grown maybe 19th,
right.
when it first arrived. I think it was but only in the lowlands.
Right.
Certainly in England, but maybe
and it's fascinating that you're thinking of trying that.
Well, I mean, it really not only makes sense in terms of, and I don't want to be seen to be recreating flavours just to be all kind of trendy and stuff like that. It's actually a genuine a desire to get some of those flavours back. Yeah. Some of them we can't get. I mean, some of those leaky maltings, that anthracite, steam train and all that kind of stuff, you'd be hard pushed to work out a modern method of gaining that. But there are lots of things that we can use that certainly would help create some of that flavour or recreate some of that flavour.
One of the things I was looking at when I noticed that the temperatures of the transfer and everything was just that little bit higher than usual. So how much different is the climate nowadays to what it was back then?
Yeah, good point.
Because I was thinking, that's quite warm to be going in at that. But then, what was the ambient temperature in the distillery at that time? Was it a bit lower than we're experiencing now?
That's a good point.
Unlocked vessels. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's endless, isn't it?
Maybe
it's a rabbit hole.
Maybe dodgy thermometers. We don't know.
Or too much mercury.
Did you have a turkey quill? You didn't go that far. No.
I think I mentioned it, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, in the passage, yeah. That was.
Find me a turkey.
Aye, and everybody had a wee read at the excerpts and stuff, and that was the one that stuck out. So I thought, right, that has to go in there.
I think it was actually tailored pine martin rather than turkey.
Yeah. We should have had one there, just sitting at the spirit safe, just to check.
Next time.
Next time, yeah.
Guys, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you.
And thanks for being part of the project. It's been
Great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Look forward to the next one.
We don't know what we don't know what Leon's third book is.
Just keep him out of the library.